This episode is brought to you by Abercrombie. Build your fits of the day with Abercrombie's newest denim drop. Here's where to start. Abercrombie's 90s straight jean goes with any shirt from tees to sweater polos. Super versatile. Their loose and baggy jeans are more trend forward, so you can grab those and go out with your friends. Abercrombie's denim fits come in a range of washes. Build your looks around Abercrombie denim. Shop online or in-store.
I think I just won my taxes.
Yeah?
I just switched to H&R Block in about 1 minute. All I had to do was drag and drop last year's return into H&R Block, and bam, my information is automatically there.
So I don't have to go digging around for all my old papers to switch?
Nope.
Sounds like we just leveled up our tax game.
Switching to H&R Block is easy. Just drag and drop your last return. It's better with Block.
Hey there! We're Book Talk for Book Talk with Jac and Amy, your book besties who take the novels you love seriously.
We embrace and respect modern fantasy, romance, and romantasy books written by women, and so it is in our nature to analyze these books as we would any other novel we might have dissected in school.
With our combined 13 years of literary academic training, we use our education to analyze and give voice to reasons you may love or hate today's popular books.
This is Jac.
And I'm Amy.
This is part 2 of this week's episode, where we're discussing chapters 1 through 6 of Sarah J. Maas's debut novel, Throne of Glass.
Before we dive in, don't forget SPILT. Spoilers, perspective, interpretation, language, and themes.
If you would like more information on SPILT, please go back and listen to the start of part 1 of this week's episode. We're now in chapter 4, and Celaena has agreed to be the champion, and now she gets special treatment. Quote, after being roughly bathed by brutish servants, the wounds on her back throbbed. Her face felt like it had been scrubbed to the bone. Celaena's being punished for being punished. It was not up to her to be dirty. It was not up to her to be there. That was what was inflicted upon her, and yet now she's being punished for that. This is not a moment of celebration or relief. This is a moment of pain, and the fact that she's still not in control of herself, of her own cleanliness. Others are in charge of cleaning her.
It's definitely a power move, whether or not it's intentional. The message Celaena is receiving right now is she can't even be trusted to clean herself after a year of being a slave and being dirty. And even if she was capable of cleaning herself, the assumption is she would never meet the standards of cleanliness. And that's bothersome.
Harsh. It's harsh. In this moment, we get to see how Celaena reacts to just a little bit of freedom. Quote, she ran a hand down the mattress and blinked at the freeness of the movement. She had forgotten what food other than soggy oats and hard bread tasted like, what a clean body and clothes could do to a person. Now it was utterly foreign. We're meeting Celaena already changed, and we as the reader do not know Celaena from before. We do not have any idea. We are starting so far into this plot, which is an amazing way to start a book. But I think we're getting an idea that she is fundamentally shifted, and we don't even know what she's shifting from.
I love that point, and it makes me think about something we get asked all the time, which is, should you read Assassin's Blade before you read Throne of Glass? Because Assassin's Blade, it is very illuminating about what Celaena's life was and what it was like before Endovier. My feeling on that is that you can't appreciate the work SJM is doing, trying to keep us intrigued in this character.
Yeah.
If you've read Assassin's Blade already. If you've already read Assassin's Blade, it spoils all the intrigue and mystery that SJM is creating in these first few chapters.
I mean, and talk about the talent that she's putting into the wanting to tease it out, figuring out what information to give us. Like that takes a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And I think she does it well.
I agree.
Now, Celaena did in fact have a dinner better than soggy oats and hard bread, but she's still quote unquote arrogant enough to deem it lacking. Quote, not only was the roast chicken unimpressive, but after a few forkfuls, she'd dashed into the bathroom to deposit the contents of her stomach. She'd eat well in Rifthold, wouldn't she? And more importantly, her stomach would adjust. Now here's a great example of food as a form of power, or I like to shorten it to food as power. First, let's start with the meal provided to Celaena. It is the first what I will assume bit of protein she's had in a year as a slave. And yet, instead of being grateful, she is unimpressed. To me, this could be because she has higher tastes from her past life. But I also feel like it's a comment on how power has been demonstrated to her so far from Dorian and the guards, and how she finds it lacking. Again, it goes back to her bravado. Ah, I can
Mm.
take these guys out. The chicken isn't that good. It's the same
She's trying
thing.
to fake it. I mean, like, the chicken has power over her, like you said, and she's
Yeah,
trying to diminish that power.
exactly. Then we go on to the fact that Celaena vomits what little she is able to eat. And first off, that's extremely realistic. The human body
Mhm.
cannot consume a lot of food if it's been malnourished and starved for so long. It is also a clue for us as readers that despite all her bravado, Celaena is in fact weak. We've talked about it in other seasons that vomiting is a demonstration of humanity, which is a demonstration of weakness. And that is still
Mhm.
true here for Celaena. Celaena dreams, though, of being able to eat and to eat well. She wants the luxurious food she was once accustomed to, and she wants to be able to enjoy it and keep it down. And that here is symbolic of her need to gain strength again and for her body to be as powerful as she once was.
Now that Celaena is alone and she's not being judged by others, she gets to have a moment that's more to herself and she gets to be vulnerable. Quote, beneath her nightgown, her ribs reached out from inside her, showing bones where flesh and meat should have been, and her breasts, once well formed, they were now no larger than they'd been in the midst of puberty. A lump clogged in her throat, which she promptly swallowed down. Several things here. Celaena learned really young that looks matter. Clearly, we talk about her doing her makeup. There's a power to femininity and sexuality, and that is important. We know this because she knew makeup was important pretty young. I think it also shows that she learned that life is easier when you look a certain way. And we know that today as pretty privilege. That is so true. Pretty privilege is a thing. We learned that Celaena values pretty things in life later on too, clothes and makeup. And it's also proof of her physical hardship that she's experienced. So every time that she touches a rib, every time that she looks down and she no longer sees what she would deem as her feminine form, that femininity has been taken away. That has been stripped with her power. Her power is tied to her femininity and it's all been taken.
There's a lot of overlapping of themes in Throne of Glass, and I actually think we're really going to enjoy breaking down that
Yeah.
the feminine versus the power and when they're in tandem.
Mhm.
SJM does a lot of work to tie these themes together for us. And we see it again as Selena goes to sleep. She, quote, took steadying breaths, savoring the hope. She'd eat a lot and exercise. She could be healthy again. Imagining outrageous feasts and regaining her former glory, she finally fell asleep. Here, the connection between food, health, and power is spelled out for us by SJM. Even
Mhm.
in Selena's own mind, these things are intertwined. And I have to pause and acknowledge this savoring hope, like savoring food. Again, if food is power and hope is something that can be savored like food, then hope can also be powerful too.
Yep. The next morning, Kale finds Selena wrapped in a blanket on the floor. And we don't really get into this just yet, but it shows how much trauma she's dealing with that she can't handle comfort yet. She has to be wrapped up on the floor to get through a night.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought this up because Selena, the night before, even thought to herself that this, quote, softness of the mattress smothered her.
Hmm.
And what we're going to learn and what we can kind of see alluded to is that she likes luxuries. She's accustomed to luxuries. But because of her time in Endovier, she's maladapted to them and they bring her discomfort.
Yeah.
What's interesting is maybe in all of her fantasies during enslavement, Selena might have thought that freedom meant accessing the luxuries again, but
Mm,
she's starting to realize that actually it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as eating 3 bites of chicken. You're going to
yeah.
vomit it up. It's the same idea. But like the night before, hope shines through. Quote, pure, fresh, warm sunlight. Sunlight that she could bask in day after day if she got her freedom. Sunlight to drown out the endless dark of the mines. We've seen how attached or attracted to nature Selena is in her own thoughts. So it makes sense why sunlight is a metaphor for hope for her. And I know it's a
Hmm.
metaphor of hope for everybody, but she has a very special connection to nature,
Yeah.
which really emphasizes and brings home the point.
Now, while Dorian might have noticed Selena's body, Kale still has not given her an inch. Quote, he didn't mention how different she looked now that she was clean. I think that, again, this is more than seeking male recognition. I think it's more than her wondering if a boy thinks she's cute. I think that this is Celaena trying to find his weakness and how to use it. We already have a moment where Dorian was looking at her body, whether that was in a sexual way or an assessing that she was weak or dirty, however kind of way. Kale, you got nothing from him. He
Mhm.
is a wall. We get a moment in the morning where it represents that new day. And like Amy was saying, day, light, all of this, it shows hope. And it's so popular in literature, but I think that just because it's popular and you see it a lot doesn't mean that's a bad thing.
Mhm.
But you get this great quote here. Her hand was pale, almost skeletal, but there was something about it, something beyond the bruises and cuts and scars that seemed beautiful and new in the morning light. This is the beginning of Celaena finding beauty within herself. These are new scars. Like, I don't think Selena's ever not had scars, right? There's been a lot of stuff in her life, but these are new scars. She's a different person. This is a new chapter. And beauty will always continue to mean a lot, but it also is going to mean different things throughout the book.
Mhm.
To my point a little bit earlier, Celaena loves clothes and the feminine. Quote, she loved clothes, loved the feeling of silk, of velvet, of satin, of suede and chiffon, and was fascinated by the grace of seams, the intricate perfection of an embossed surface. And when she won this ridiculous competition, when she was free, she could buy all the clothes she wanted. Celaena likes what is typically feminine, and this is a form of rebellion to the assassin she was raised to be. I also believe that it probably reminds her of her childhood and her mother. It's the feminine, it's the beauty, and it's not necessarily sexuality, but it's that feminine and beauty that is the rebellion. I feel like it also represents freedom because it will show that she is out of this prison and out of the prison of being an assassin.
Mhm. One of the things that makes SJM a good writer is, again, how the personality of the character, of the protagonist from whom the perspective might be coming from or is coming from, how their interests interweave itself into the narrative. We saw it earlier with the sounds of the prison sounding like a symphony and knowing that Aelin or Celaena loves music. Here, as Celaena is looking outside the window, quote, she gaped at the bluish gray sky, at the clouds slipping on their shoes and shuffling toward the horizon. Like Jack talked about earlier, this has to do with the representation of freedom and beauty that we see from Celaena's eyes and how the two are intertwined. That feeling of freedom is intoxicating for Celaena, who wants to dance and skip when she sees the sky. But the reality of where she is still, in fact, very sobering for her. When Celaena and Cale go outside to meet up with the rest of their caravan, quote, she faltered as she beheld the mounds of bone-colored rock and the small figures going in and out of the many mouth-like holes cut into the mountains. Work would continue without her when she left them all to this miserable fate. So there's a couple things going on in this one. Quote, there's bone-colored rock. To me, it sounds like a mass grave, that all these bones are scattered throughout the compound. The mines are like mouths, holes in the mountainside, but at the same time, it looks like the imprisoned are being consumed as they enter these mouth-like holes. They are prey, and they are being consumed for the benefit of those that have imprisoned them. To me, it feels obvious in how Celaena's viewing this that she feels guilty about leaving, and she knows she's lucky to leave, but she can't really confront the guilt that she feels about it. Once she's by the horses, Celaena is greeted by Dorian's dogs, which she stoops down to pet. The dogs obviously like Celaena. She likes them. I think it foreshadows her future pet
Mhm.
situation. What's interesting about these dogs is they are compared to weapons twice. Quote, they were each sleek as arrows. And then, quote, their tails slashing the ground like whips. Now, Celaena is at the level of the dogs with one knee on the ground, and she is like them, a weapon to be used by powerful people. That's exactly how Dorian's going to use her when he enters her as a champion. This is important positioning as Dorian approaches. He stands over her, and his boots are the first thing she sees. She has to look up to look him in the eye. Even Cale comes over and stands behind her. Both men are standing over her. She is not the one in the power position. In fact, this is almost comes across as a sexual positioning to me.
I didn't want to be the one to say it,
I said it.
but I'm happy that you did. These characters are not 18 or 20. They are
But they
30
are.
something. No, they are 30 something in my version.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say something else. In this moment, though, where she finds herself kind of in this defenseless position, Celaena thinks, quote, it would take all of 2 movements to disarm Kale. It's bravado, right? She's in this situation where she should be afraid. She probably is afraid, but she puts on that facade so that she doesn't acknowledge her fear.
And I feel like that fear and that bravado just kind of goes back to this mentality that men just happen to exist. Celaena uses this attitude as a tool and a weapon against these men. When Dorian asks if she's going to stay quiet, she says, quote, I'm afraid your questions didn't merit a verbal response. I'm gonna have to use that sometime. I love it because it's almost negging. And people might be like, what's negging, Jack? Well, it's when a guy negs a woman, they're undermining them, they're diminishing them, they're hurting their self-confidence. And that's like sometimes guys' way of flirting, which is just bullshit. And don't let it happen, ladies. But with Celaena, men just exist around her and they need to be worth her attention.
Sorry, I'm so glad you brought up the negging because it feels very much like little boys who push little girls on the playground. It's the same idea, just more harmful.
So she should push them first.
That's exactly right. Just a little note, SJM has been intentional when horses have shown up in her stories before. We've seen that in A Court of Thorns and Roses, most obviously. So I had to stop and look at the horse situation here as well. And I want to note that Celaena is given a piebald mare. So that's a mare that's white with large brown markings. They can also be other colors, but I'm going to say brown for now. Kale, who chains Celaena to his horse, rides a black stallion, which is a very powerful type of image and association. So even in the horses, there's a power differential in the appearance and the connotation of these animals, which, of course, always.
Very classic. I think like when we talk about ACOTAR, please guys go listen to that season because we talk a lot about this and you can see where it came from, how she was building it up to begin with.
Yeah.
SJM is putting the time to show us that Celaena has trauma and PTSD. And this is when they're getting ready to go through the gate. So I want to flag that. Quote, the wall suddenly loomed and her blood throbbed in her veins. The last time she'd been this close to the wall, the crack of the whip sounded, followed by a scream. None of these slaves would ever leave here, even when they died, and that even if she was free, others were not. This is showing us again that Celaena's identity has changed. We need to remember that to understand that she's an unreliable narrator because she is figuring herself out. This isn't us saying we can't trust anything she says. She's an unreliable narrator. There are reasons why authors or why characters, are unreliable narrators. And this is one. She doesn't know who she is. She's figuring it out.
That's exactly right. SJM is also tying the image of Celaena's scars on her back to her PTSD and trauma. But more importantly, they're also being tied to her guilt for being able to go free and leaving all these other prisoners behind. Quote, she became all too aware of the 3 long scars down her back. Even if she earned her freedom, those scars would always remind her of what she'd endured, and that even if she was free, others were not. The scars and the guilt associated with them is going to be a recurring image and theme, and it's important to establish it now as Celaena departs from Endovier. It would be weird to bring it up later.
I know. BT dubs, I have scars. A big theme that we're going to see here is our thresholds, and it's a huge theme we see in ACOTAR. All right, I'll plug it one more time, guys. Go listen to our ACOTAR season. But we're going to see that here as well. Quote, Celaena faced forward, pushing those thoughts from her mind as they entered the passage through the wall. In literature, you will see thresholds, usually meaning a big change. It's a metaphor and it shows that there's a new beginning, a new shift. Once you go through a threshold, things are not the same. And we see this with Celaena going through the walls that separate the minds from the outside and showing us visually in a very beautiful way that her world has now changed. It's not a coincidence that Celaena struggled with the idea of being a slave and finally becoming free. She thinks this, quote, she shifted her hands in their shackles, watching the chain sway and clink between her and the captain of the guard. It was attached to his saddle, which was cinched around his horse, which, when they stopped, could be subtly unbridled, just enough so that with a fierce tug of her end, the chain would rip the saddle off the beast. He'd tumble to the ground, and she would, and it just kind of cuts off. Celaena is telling herself this narrative that if she were physically capable, she could easily do these things. And like we said, we made it clear that she's not capable of it. So it's not a surprise to me that you have this big moment where Celaena's like really struggling with this, I'm no longer going to be trapped here, to then this overly cocky, well, I can pull him down from just this chain. These things balance each other even when they seem too extreme.
Yeah, and I have to also say or think that if Celaena wasn't trying to calculate and do these things regardless of her level of power or strength,
Mhm.
I wouldn't believe her to be Adarlan's greatest assassin,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So SJM has to balance the calculatingness of an
Mhm.
assassin with how much Celaena actually believes she's capable of it.
Yep.
Maybe it's just inherent in her mind because she's been trained for so long.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I also ask myself often when we come across a funny character is how much of the humor is the author's own humor.
Mhm.
But I have to say, regardless of what other people think, I think Celaena's funny. And I really like her.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing with you.
Just trying to acknowledge that I am not always right.
With that, we are trying to acknowledge that you're not always right by saying a statement that everyone agrees with.
No, I think everyone agrees is too broad a statement.
I think everyone thinks Celaena's funny. It's fair that people don't think it's funny.
Yeah, that's fair. Favorite
Yeah.
is not funny.
She has her moments.
Sometimes. Quote, after hours of silence, Celaena turned to Cale. Rumor has it that once the king is finished with his war against Wendlin, he'll begin colonizing the West. She said it casually, but hoped he'd confirm or deny. The captain surveyed her up and down, frowned, and then looked away. I agree, she said, sighing loudly. The fate of those empty wide plains and those miserable mountain regions seems dull to me as well. Now, I feel like I highlight this moment because I feel like it accomplishes a lot. It's more of the Cale and Celaena dynamic, which I think is important because it juxtaposes what their dynamic will be at by the end of the novel. It also provides information about the political situation and the region, and establishes that Celaena is maybe a witty character. We see it again later as well. When Cale asks Celaena how old she is, she responds, 18, but he said nothing. I know, she continued, it is impressive that I accomplished so much at such an early age. I love her.
She's great.
She's great.
Let's talk about age. Celaena's 18. Cale's 22. He was 20 when he became captain of the guard. And we assume that Dorian is 20. I get it. YA was very popular at the time. I don't blame SJM for making them so young, especially the fact that, we're going to assume that it's capable to become captain of the guard at 20. Doesn't matter what favoritism you have, but whatever, go along with it. Again, in my heart and in my mind, they are in their late 20s, maybe 30s. But the reason why I think that's important is because there's going to be a lot of topics about sex and sexuality, which I'm inherently uncomfortable talking about that when it's like basically children to me. However, in those moments, I'm going to delete that. And I think that there was kind of like a contradiction between the characters, their growth, and their age. There are times where Celaena definitely feels young and definitely feels like an 18-year-old. And then there's times when everyone just feels way older than what they are. So I will bring up the times where I feel like they seem young. For the most part, I'm going to live my life that they're older.
Same. I agree.
Thank you. Thank you. Celaena's determined to find Cale's weak spot, though, and she leans into the tools that she knows. Quote, Lord? He didn't reply, and she smiled slowly. Lord Cale Westfall. She fanned herself with a hand. How the court ladies must have fawned over you. Now, that doesn't work because he wasn't given the title of Lord. And titles in that moment mattered more than sexual attraction. Just a little cool snippet. Cale's an interesting character.
He is an interesting character. And titles and how they apply to Cale is also going to be interesting as we progress with the story. I view the last few pages of chapter 4 from a writing perspective, and I actually find them interesting and something that I would want to be able to achieve in my own writing. SJM does a good job making Celaena seem like a gabber, like she's talking a lot.
Yaps.
While she yaps, it makes her feel real while also not annoying the reader, at least from my point of
Mhm.
view. The flow of the conversation feels natural. The areas Kale chooses to respond or not respond feel natural. And there are enough instances where Celaena chooses to insert her own comments when Kale doesn't respond, like she's trying to fill the silence. I love it. It's short and succinct, but it does the job.
Mhm.
Kale's response to all of this is also very illuminating. Quote, "Shall I gag you? Or are you capable of being silent without my assistance?" So even others like Kale view her as a yapper. Now, I have to ask, is Kale a jerk? Or perhaps he doesn't want to talk to Celaena because he doesn't trust her and doesn't want to give her any information. Or maybe, and I believe this one more so than the rest, does Kale not want to talk to Celaena because doing so humanizes her
Mm.
and he cannot afford that?
She's an enemy at this point until
Mhm.
proven otherwise. She's a
Yeah.
prisoner. She's a means to an end. It is his job to protect Dorian and everything. And until she's a prisoner.
Yeah.
I will say, though, this is where I wish that this wasn't a YA book because I feel like modern SJM would have responded with, like, shall I gag you? Like, I feel like Celaena would have been
Mm.
like, ooh, don't threaten me with a good time or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, absolutely.
Chapter 5. Control is important for Celaena, even with the false sense of control. Quote, Celaena brushed a stray wisp of hair from her face and allowed herself to be led into the clearing. It's not real control. She can't just allow them. Like, they're going to do that. They're going to manhandle her, but it's a survival technique. It's a moment to tell yourself, I'm still in control.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up because in my book I wrote, she's shackled. There's no allow.
Yeah.
She's being forced.
Yeah.
But to your point, she's telling herself a narrative to survive. And it's also a reminder to us as readers, her perspective is skewed.
Yep. There is a vulnerability to Celaena, and some of that is youthfulness. When they break, the dogs, quote, approach the assassin with wagging tails and lay at her feet. At least someone was glad for her company. There is this sense that she's starving for connection and wanting to be with someone else. And there's that vulnerability. And it also shows that she's not entirely closed off, which is great because she's been a slave for the past year.
Mm-hmm.
That might close you off, but we get a sense of who she is. And there's that vulnerable side to Celaena here.
And you can tell that she's feeling vulnerable because she's worried about feeling sick or being sick from eating in front of all these guards. Now, again, she's already in chains. She's already, the prisoner. She already appears weak to them. However, because of the narrative in Celaena's head, she has to continue to tell herself, I can't be viewed as weak. And she will control the things she can control to avoid that vulnerability. I also have to note that if she's weak, can't keep down food, and doesn't gain strength or appear strong, it's going to make her ultimately less desirable as a champion, which means she would lose her shot at freedom. So there's a lot of vulnerability from a lot of different angles that are coming at her. Another writing thing that I noticed is that while Celaena is observing Dorian and Duke Parrington, quote, Dorian's entire body seemed tense, and she didn't fail to notice the way he clenched his jaw when Parrington spoke. Whatever their relationship was, it wasn't cordial. I feel like the SJM of today might not have said that last sentence, the whatever
Mhm.
their relationship, it wasn't cordial, because you can see it in the writing. And
Yeah.
that's just a small nuance that I think more experienced writers is the more they write, the more they realize they don't have to have those extra words.
I think that this is also a good call out. I don't want anyone to think that we're like picking on her for being a
Mm-mm.
youthful writer. I think this is more when every time we call it out, it's going to be a celebration of her growth. And nor do I think that that's like a bad line to add. It just shows the progression as a writer. So giving her grace,
Yeah.
but calling these moments out is saying like, wow, look at how far she's come.
Yeah. Because she's come a long way.
Yeah.
While they're in the forest and breaking for lunch, Celaena looks around and we see her again attracted to the nature around her. We don't yet know the significance of it. It's important to call out for those of us who have read the series and understand where Celaena's at. She sees the leaves dangling like jewels. She describes the ground as, quote, a carpet of such riches coating the forest floor. Celaena also observes that the forest, quote, echoed with the remnants of the power that had once given these trees such unnatural beauty. For a first-time reader, we're going to be like, how does she know this? For us who have read the series, we know it's because this is Brandon's forest, which Celaena mentions, but we also know what that actually means for Celaena.
And now a word from our sponsors.
When it comes to grocery shopping, I have the hardest time coming up with high-protein meals that also meet all my dietary restrictions because I'm gluten-free, I'm dairy-free, I'm so many things. And Hungry Root has changed all that for me and has made it so easy to eat the way I want, as well as making it easy for me to cook every day.
I love Hungry Root because it's like having your own personal shopper, and they're able to take care of weekly grocery shopping and recommending healthy groceries tailored to your taste, nutrition preference, and health goals. For me, one of my health goals for this year is making sure that my body, my heart, and everything is healthy.
It also has great options for everybody in your family. I eat very differently from my partner, and so I'm able to find foods that suit my needs but also suit hers.
It makes grocery shopping simple and stress-free because this is the new year, therefore I want less stressors in my life. And you just have to tell them about your goals and preferences, and then they fill your cart for you with personalized recommendations that get smarter the more that they learn about you and learn about what you like and what you don't like. You're going to love Hungry Root as much as we do. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box plus get a free item in every box for life.
Go to hungryroot.com/booktalk, that's BOOKTALK, and use the code BOOKTALK, BOOKTALK. That's hungryroot.com/booktalk, and use the code BOOKTALK, BOOKTALK, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. I don't know about you, Jack, but when it's gift-giving season, as much as I love to get everyone gifts, I always stop and get myself something as well because you never know if it's going to be a win or bust with everybody else's presents to you.
The real gift is the one we can give ourselves, particularly the ones we can order from Quince. Quince has the most amazing everyday luxury items, but at an affordable price.
This is the time of year where those iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters from Quince are the perfect snuggly thing to wear to the office, to wear on the couch.
I've been visiting my mom who now lives in the East Coast, and it is cold there, and I do not have the proper clothes. And I've actually been ordering some of my clothes from Quince because all items on Quince are 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They're able to do that by partnering direct with top factories and cutting out the cost of middleman, and passes on the savings to you. And you can get sweaters and coats, which is what I got.
Not only do they use premium fabrics and finishes, they also work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. If you haven't treated yourself yet, get yourself that present you'll love this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order.
That's QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/booktalk.
Llévate más de lo que esperas todos los días con el nuevo McValue en McDonald's. Ahora puedes comprar uno y sumarle otro por $1. Así que cuando tu equipo favorito enfrente a sus rivales, enfrenta tus antojos con $5 Meal Deals. Y si estás corriendo para alcanzar el desayuno, corre al app para llevarte ofertas antes del cutoff. Tú decides, y con McValue, tu decisión siempre rinde más. Precios y participación pueden variar. BOGO $1 válido para un producto de igual o menor valor. Debe estar registrado en Rewards para ofertas en el app.
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're gonna love this house.
Bunk beds in a closet?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
We learn a little bit more about the world Celaena is in as well. In addition to some of her history, we also learned that, quote, the king had claimed that magic was an affront to the goddess and her gods, that to wield it was to impertinently imitate their power. But even though the king had banned magic, most knew the truth. Magic had completely and utterly disappeared of its own accord. First off, this is just creating more questions. Why did magic disappear? It makes us want to know more about the world. But it also shows a classic theme when it comes to people, particularly men, in power. They want to control others they view as a threat to themselves by making something about them illegal, by making their
Mhm.
power illegal, by making their weapons illegal, by doing something to assert power over them.
Mhm.
And we see that here with magic, the fae, and fairies.
It's the kind of discrimination that you see in real world too.
Absolutely. We see it in many places today in, our current world. We see it in history in
Mhm.
World War I and World War II. And we see it in a lot of other local and global instances.
Yep. Now, we can touch more about the next section in breadcrumbs, but I want to talk about the ability to forget. Quote, it had been a while since she'd contemplated the gifts she'd lost, though the memory of her abilities haunted her dreams. Despite the carnage, perhaps it was good that her magic had vanished. It was far too dangerous for any sane person to wield. Her gifts might have destroyed her by this point. Now, we'll get to that in breadcrumbs, but I think what's important here is to show how much she's blocked for the sake of safety and mental protection.
And again, as you've said, Jack, false narratives make Celaena feel safe.
Yep.
It's how she copes with her reality. And she can't do anything about the fact that she doesn't have magic. So why
Mhm.
not just be grateful that she doesn't have it? That's
Yeah,
easier in the long run for her.
absolutely.
We also see here that Celaena is wielding the knowledge she has of herself and her past carefully. She has a tendency to omit things, and she's doing so now, and that will be a recurring theme for her.
An example of showing and not telling feelings is the following example. After thinking about everything that she lost, quote, she looked at the sunlight filtering through the canopy, how the trees swayed in the wind with their long, bony arms around each other. She suppressed a shiver. Trees don't have bony arms. I had to reread the sentence multiple times. I was like, wait, what? Am I not doing this correctly? But you know what does have bony arms? The dead and her. And I feel like this is a good moment of her reflecting on everything that she's lost and showing that the dead are comforting each other almost in a way.
I like that interpretation because I didn't see it that way, but I can
Mhm.
see why you would see it that way. From my perspective, this is not the first time Celaena has anthropomorphized nature, giving
Mhm.
it human qualities. She does that a lot, and I think it's because, and maybe I know, she feels a kinship with nature and with the forest.
Mhm.
And I think that anthropomorphization, I have a hard time with that word, is important when we're about to see evidence of some of the little fairies and spirits in the forest trying to connect back with Celaena.
Yep. There is a reality of her weakness when it starts to set in. Now that Selena's emotionally vulnerable, we don't see her mentally making threats at this point. Quote, Selena's legs had become so stiff that Kale was forced to help her onto her horse. It was painful to ride. There's no moment of, I am so embarrassed. I
Mhm.
can't believe I'm doing this. He's lucky I didn't kick him as he carried me through. This is a very humbling moment, and we're going to see more vulnerable side to her in the next chapter.
Mhm.
The chapter ends with Celaena being offered flowers by the little fairies, which freaks her out. The entire ride through the land, quote, she spent a good portion of the day with sweaty palms and a racing heart and kept one eye fixed on the passing woods. She's worried that she's going to get caught. I totally remember the very first time reading this and thinking like that. It was another one that just really stuck with me.
Mhm. Mhm. And because we've been talking about identity and power and identity, some of her fear in my mind is also about, oh, they're going to wonder, why does Celaena Sardothien have a connection to little fairies?
Yeah.
It's her identity, her secret identity is the only one of the only remaining sources of power for her.
Mhm.
And to reveal that too soon is to doom herself.
Yeah, absolutely. Chapter 6 starts with 2 weeks of travel. I should keep a timeline of how much time has happened. I know that's on the internet, but I should do it too. And the elements are hard, making it difficult for everyone. Quote, she couldn't withstand the agony of wet shoes. There's a lot of tongue in cheek to her misery here. She does talk about this sucks. I'm wet. I'm cold. But you have to remember, she's just coming back from the salt mines. I don't think that she's thinking this is the worst thing that she's ever experienced. Now, time goes by, things are clean, things are dry, and Dorian comes to get her and Kale, and she notices his outfit. Quote, he did look rather good in his knee-high brown boots, and his leather belt did do nicely, even though the hunting knife seemed a bit too bejeweled. I think this is an example or clue about not taking him seriously, whether that's Celaena not taking him seriously or the reader. He is a kept man, right? He's a prince with pretty knives and not a true threat. And just a fun thing, we saw this in ACOTAR with Lucian and in his dagger. By the way, I'm going to keep teasing it out until people go and listen.
I also made that note. I was like, oh, that's very Lucian.
Yeah. The way that Dorian summons them, though, I think it's meant to demean Celaena. Again, we're back to that negging. Come see the view. Bring that one, I supposed. Celaena bristled. That one, as if she was a piece of baggage. This is Dorian trying to do something nice. He's trying to be like, look, here's a pretty view for a pretty girl. But he can't do that, right? So he's coming in being like, you kind of suck. Would you like to go see a view?
Classic Dorian.
Yeah.
As Celaena is guided on her horse to the view, quote, Celaena tried not to wince as she slid backward in the saddle. If she fell, she'd die of humiliation. So we're seeing that pride, that bravado come up again. But also, if she fell out of her saddle, she wouldn't be able to compete as a champion. She'd probably hurt herself, and she can't afford that weakness. Her freedom would be at stake.
Absolutely. Celaena takes in the castle, and we get an idea of how gaudy this whole thing is. Even Celaena's opinion is similar to now to when she saw it the first time when she was younger. Quote, even then she found the castle tasteless, a waste of resource and talent, its towers reaching into the sky like fingered claws. I mean, she gets to say that because she, princess, she knows castles.
What I like about this visual is that it makes the castle feel monstrous. Just before that, the narrator explains to us that the glass castle was built on top of the stone castle. And all of this, when we know the reality of who's in power and what is in power, it all feels ominous and foreshadowing for that reality. In my mind, the glass castle being built on top of the stone castle, it's almost parasitic. The glass castle is using the stone castle as a host, and through that foundation is able to have these towers that look like clawed fingers that are imposing upon the skyline.
Yeah. We're also learn the contradiction of Celaena, even at a young age. It was always there. Quote, she remembered the powder blue cloak that she kept touching, the weight of her fresh curls, the scratch of her stockings against the saddle, how she'd worried about the spot of mud on her red velvet shoes, and how she kept thinking about that man, the man that she killed 3 days earlier. These are two different, it's like, oh, my muddy shoes and the murder.
What I find interesting is that in looking at her past trauma, even though she had thoughts about the castle, she was still trying to ground herself from its monstrosity, but also the horror of having killed someone for 3 days earlier by, the tactile act of touching her clothing, paying attention to her clothing. I just thought that was worth pointing out. While they're viewing the castle, Dorian mutters, quote, one more tower and the whole thing will collapse. There's a very obvious lack of reverence on Dorian's part, which is very illuminating when he's been such an asshole leading up to this, right? You think he's the perfect, pampered, compliant prince, but this is the first sign of the crack in his facade. I also view this as a metaphor for how Dorian is critical of his father's power. It's not just about the castle, it's about his father and the things that he's done. Meanwhile, Celaena can't pay attention to what Dorian's saying. She instead sees, quote, the shadow of the castle grew across the city like a hulking beast. She has more fear where Dorian has more criticism, and she's not able to make the connection with what Dorian's saying right now.
After seeing Celaena with so much recent trauma, her last time being at the salt mines, we get an insight to more past trauma without even realizing that we're getting insight to past trauma. Selena couldn't keep her eyes from the castle. She felt so small, even from afar. She'd forgotten how dwarfing the building was. You look as if you're facing the gallows, not your freedom. That's what Kale said to her. Selena is currently struggling with her identity and the same feeling she has when she first went into the city, younger and closer to when she had, family and land. So, a lot of mirroring moments here. We get a real moment of connection and humanity from Kale, which I was surprised and I forgot how early that happened in the book, especially for how much distance he's been putting. He says that Endovier must have been terrible, and her response is, quote, "The overseers had been instructed to treat me with extra care and took the liberty of rubbing salt into my wounds, salt that I mined, and whipped me often enough that some of the gashes never fully closed." And there's a lot more to that quote, right? And it's more like there's a lot more that she went through and how she relied on the help of the Elway people. And we are getting so much groundwork done here.
There's so much groundwork being done. And to your point, there's also a lot of work with Kale that's happening. It's emphasized by how, quote, Kale didn't reply and only glanced at her before dismounting. He didn't speak to her again that day except to bark commands. It's a reminder that, in my view, he doesn't want to engage with Celaena because she will be humanized in his eyes through the process. That's why he avoids talking to her.
Not because she's pretty.
Not because she's pretty.
Celaena can't sleep and looks at the castle. So, because as one does, imagining it as if time was passing and she was not. So she looks at it and the mountains are rising and falling. Vines are creeping all over it, covering it in thorns and leaves, while she's the only one awake. And that's such an interesting visualization in her imagination and wanting to see a city collapse in time. Quote, "She didn't wish to reign over the city again. Magic was dead, the Fae were banished or executed, and she would never again have anything to do with the rise and fall of kingdoms. She wasn't fated for anything, not anymore." This is so amazing because I feel like what we're hearing is Aelin. We are not hearing Celaena talk. This to me is all Aelin. And this is Aelin not wanting to deal with the life that she's been dealt and with the loss. And I just really applaud SJM for giving us a moment with a character, because Celaena and Aelin, same but different. We're getting this character that, we don't really discover until a couple more books from now.
Yeah. And it's pretty clear in this that, like, if she cares that magic is dead and the Fae have been banished and executed, well, what does that mean? That she's probably one of them. But we don't necessarily make that connection this early.
No, because she likes the dogs. She likes everything. She likes dogs. She likes flowers. I can believe she's compassionate.
Yeah. What we're seeing here is what we've seen time and time again with Celaena. She's telling herself a pretty lie, and that's part of her coping strategy. She wasn't fated for anything.
Yeah.
She must not be fated for anything if her life is this shitty. Well, Celaena, maybe not.
It's so dark. Sorry, I'm just kind of process that. I'm like, oh God. All right, don't feel depressed. That's fine. This is her, not me. We get our first point of view change, and it's not Celaena, and it's from Dorian. And he is watching Celaena. Quote, "He found her beautiful, if a bit strange and sour. It was something in the way that her eyes sparkled when she looked at something lovely in the landscape. He couldn't understand it." It shows that Dorian is still mentally young compared to Celaena, right? And that he does not understand the loss of freedom. And, we get this beautiful image of Celaena, and we're going to get into that image. But I also think that SJM is doing the work to show how much Dorian is going to grow. Now, this next part, shout out to listener Jess Devo, who says my favorite scene is when they travel back to the castle and Dorian sees Celaena looking at the stars. And I completely agree. So let's get into this amazing line. Quote, "The image haunted his dreams throughout the night. A lovely girl gazing at the stars and the stars who gazed back. It's reminiscent to when she's going to become Aelin. in Heir of Fire. Quote, she lifted her face to the stars. She was Aelin Ash River Galathinius, heir to 2 mighty bloodlines, protector of a once glorious people, and queen of Terrasen. She was Aelin Ash River Galathinius, and she would not be afraid. I gave myself chills. Okay, don't
Yeah,
cry.
you gave me chills too.
Oh my god, I'm so excited. It's also reminiscent of future things to come in future books.
What I love about this scene from Dorian's perspective is that it is a complete contrast to the last thoughts we have from Celaena and how, quote, she wasn't fated for anything, not anymore. With the stars looking down on her and her looking back up at them, Dorian can clearly see that that is not true, even
Mhm.
if Celaena can't see that for herself. And I thought that was just a really beautiful, yep.
So, if you're familiar with the podcast, we like to save breadcrumbs at the very end. However, we have more to talk about. So, we're kind of like brushing things in, sweeping them away, which has now resulted in the growth of.
I was going to say sweeping them together, not sweeping them away.
Okay, sweeping them together. Breadcrumbs and broomsticks. I was just going to the name.
Yes, breadcrumbs and broomsticks. Now, if you're new to the podcast, breadcrumbs, we're literally talking about the pieces of breadcrumbs like Hansel and Gretel that SJM leaves for us to lead us to the foreshadowing and the foresight she had of what was to come.
And as our listener, as Danielle Salazar says, the foreshadowing is one of her favorite things. It feels like every page has a breadcrumb to reread. So let's go into some of the ones that we found.
In chapter 1, we see this reference to future love interests. We know as readers that Chaol will be a love interest in a future book, as will Rowan. Chaol's sword, interestingly, has a, quote, shimmering pommel shaped like an eagle mid-flight,
Similar
which...
to another bird love interest.
Yeah, so I don't know, is Chaol's family represented by an eagle? And Rowan...
Rowan's an actual hawk.
Right. That's, I mean...
Well, Chaol's
yes.
holding an eagle sword, so, like,
Yes.
in this moment, he's an eagle. As we all know, hawks are far sexier than eagles.
Yes, they sure are.
In chapter 2, we meet Dorian dressed like this, quote, on his black doublet, an emblazoned gold rendering of the royal wyvern occupied the entirety of his chest. Red cloak fell gracefully around him and his throne. What does this remind you of? Manon, like literally, wyvern, red cape. And shout out to M. Wally for pointing that out.
Also in chapter 2, Celaena talks back to Dorian and Chaol corrects her. I should hope not, Celaena interjected. Your Highness, Chaol Westfall snapped at her. What? Celaena asked. You will address him as Your Highness. Shout out to Awkward Shelbs and Molly Merrill 24. They both wanted to make sure we called out that Celaena is genuinely confused when this happens because she thought Chaol was calling her Your Highness. And genuinely, I laughed out loud when I read this scene.
Maniacal. Young SJM maniacal.
Yep.
In chapter 3, after agreeing to fight as Dorian's champion, Celaena thinks, quote, yes, she would go to Rifthold, to anywhere, even through the gates of Word and into hell itself, if it meant freedom. Funny how she'll eventually go through the gates of Word later, and multiple times. And funny how these same gates will appear in Crescent City and open up into hell. Yeah.
SJM. In chapter 4, Celaena wears a, quote, forest green velvet cape during her travels. This is the color of Terrasen, like the forest she keeps longing to escape to. How convenient that it is also her cape.
Right. Also in chapter 4, while traveling, Celaena thinks about the lands, quote, the uncharted lands of the West. Legends were still told of the strange and deadly people who dwelt there, the cruel and bloodthirsty descendants of the fallen witch kingdom. Manon.
In chapter 5.
That's Manon, in case no one knew what I was saying.
In chapter 5, while traveling in the forest, Celaena remarks, it's Brennan's forest. My father used to tell me stories about it being full of fairies, a soldier said. They're all gone now, along with those damned wretched fae. We got rid of them. I'd watch your tongues, Celaena snapped. King Brannon was fae, and Oakwald is still his. This is a breadcrumb for Celaena talking about her ancestor. And later, Later, when Celaena's thinking about the history of the world, she recalls that, quote, the fairies and fae fled, seeking shelter in the wild, untouched places of the world. That includes Rowan and company, who we get to see in Heir of Fire.
And also in chapter 5, we get more information about Celaena and her past. Quote, she'd been only 8
Arobin.
when Orban Hamel, her mentor and the king of the assassins, found her halfway submerged on the banks of a frozen river and brought her to his keep on the border between Adarlan and Terrasen. But she still remembered the beauty of the world before the king of Adarlan had ordered so much of it burned. Now there was nothing left for her, nor would there ever be. I mean, talk about breadcrumbs to everything that is her past. But I love your note here, Amy.
I just wanted to point out that SJM has an obsession with 8, the
Yeah.
age of 8. If you've read A Court of Thorns and Roses, then you might remember that Feyre was 8 when her mother died, and Az was 8 when he developed his shadows, which were both turning points in their lives. And Celaena's got her own
Yep.
version.
And finally, in chapter 6, Dorian's watching Celaena at camp, quote, through a clearing in the swirling mass of clouds, a cluster of stars could be seen. He couldn't help thinking that they gazed down at her. Brannon.
King Brannon.
He's the Brannon.
Which is a stag constellation, I believe.
I love it.
Which we'll learn about later.
All right, let's get into some broomsticks of the breadcrumbs.
Here's some comments, questions, thoughts that our listeners shared with us in anticipation of this episode. The first one is from Mads Walk, and her question is whether or not we think it's obvious that Celaena is someone who ultimately is Aelin, but we don't know when we're first reading this book.
A little bit, kind of, yes and no. There's tons of mystery, and when you're paying attention to it, it's there. And until you know, you don't know,
Yeah, I mean, we have no idea who Aelin is at this point. We don't know that there's lost royalty from Terrasen. So we can't know those things, but we can know that Celaena, there's something more to Celaena than we actually are capable of understanding.
Yep. Another comment, one from Faith Gillenkenner. She says that, or they said, I will defend Kale forever. Please don't hit him with the Tam Tam treatment. And this is also followed by Jess saying, did she tell us Kale was the worst in the beginning and we all just missed it? So if you're not familiar in A Court of Thorns and Roses, we are critical on everyone. We're just not, we don't discriminate on our analysis. And when you do an analysis of a character, you look at the good, the bad, the ugly. You're going to hear it no matter what. I don't think he's going to get the Tam Tam treatment yet. I don't think so. We'll see.
I mean, I will say this, unlike the comments I got from listeners when I first started reading the Throne of Glass series, I did not find Kale as despicable as some listeners find him to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're just going to observe, what is Kale doing? What might be his underlying motivations? And then they're going to speak for themselves in the long run.
And I'll be frank, I don't remember reading any of this. This feels like reading a new book sometimes. There are some things I remember. I was like, ooh, flowers left on the side. I remember that. I know we're mad at Kale. I know there's a betrayal. I couldn't tell you what. So I'm coming into it with fresh eyes.
Our next comment is from the original Ginger, and they say Dorian, Kale, and Celaena's relationship at the start changes so much by the end of the book. And yes, we're definitely calling out the bad attitude that Dorian and Kale have. And I love this, and this is mostly spoiler free for Kingdom of Ash, but when they're all reunited again and the three of them hug, it is such a beautiful image that stays in my mind that is so much the opposite of what we're experiencing right now in Throne of Glass.
I'm so excited because I don't remember this at all. So I can't wait to get there in however many years it takes us. Also, we can spoil. This is breadcrumbs and broomsticks. This is a spoiler section. Next is from Mads Walks, how the Throne of Glass world is first introduced compared to how complex it is later. And I think we get the similar treatment with ACOTAR, where we get a little small bit of this. You get what you need in the first book. The world will grow as the plot and the characters will grow.
And there's only so much you can do in a first book.
Truly.
Our last set of comments, one is from Riley Kinnan, how SJM's writing style reflects the youth of Celaena and grows as she does through the series. And then from CRD Amore, thoughts on the tone of Maas's writing as Celaena compared to her other female characters.
Yeah.
Female main characters.
Yeah. I think you can tell where some of it's like she, started writing this at 16 and there's that youthfulness there. But again, she was 26 by the time this was published. So she was a woman. She had gone to college. She was experienced. She was taking this through different rounds of edits. So, I think that it's exciting to see her at the beginning of her career, especially when you see how technical she becomes, especially where I feel like I'll say it, I'm enjoying reading this more than I did Crescent City. Crescent City was so hard analyzing. It was just so many sentences that were so long and detailed.
I can understand readers who've read Crescent City, who've read A Court of Thorns and Roses, and if they read Throne of Glass last, this might be a really difficult first few books to read because the writing style is so much more youthful.
Yeah.
I think it is appropriate to the character, and it's just what SJM was capable at the time that she wrote it. There's nothing wrong with that. We see that in all authors. When you read their debut book versus book number 5, they're going to be very, very different.
Yeah.
Now, the tone of the writing, I think Celaena and Bryce are probably the closest, but where the difference is that Celaena is more internal in some of her witticisms or mannerisms. Geez, compared to Bryce, who's more outwardly witty.
And now let's get to the question that we asked at the top of the episode.
Jac, is Celaena Sardothien a protagonist we want to follow into this novel and the epic series to come?
I think at this point, yes. I think that especially in these first 6 chapters, we've seen so much teaser. We've seen tons of, clues of who's she going to be, what's going to come out of this. And I think that we've seen funny, we've seen vulnerable, we've seen emotional, which I will define as different than vulnerable. And then we see her hopeful. You can't have more than that. And then you have 2 hot guys that, who is she going to be with? So I think when it comes to like the first 6 chapters, SJM does such a good job of creating a female character that we could want to know more about.
Yeah. And I love that as we get to know Celaena Sardothien, there actually end up being more questions that there are answers in the first 6 chapters, but it's not so much so that it's overwhelming. It really is this giant mystery / intrigue that SJM is creating through this character that makes you want to learn more about her. It helps that she's funny. It helps that she's got this bravado about her because you want to understand her and see what makes her tick.
I also want to give SJM a shout out. We haven't had like a huge info dump, and that's really hard in a fantasy world. Like we've been getting more of this world as it opens. Like we know they were fairy. We know magic no longer exists. We know all sorts of other things, but like talk about doing such a good job of, like, it's just not dawning on me. I'm like, there's no info dump.
There's no info dump that is pages long that was like too much information for no reason.
Not egregious. I'll say not egregious.
Right.
Dump.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree. I think she does it really well. It's the slow dripping of information.
Yeah.
There are other books she doesn't do that as well.
No. Talk about though, like first book or first 6 chapters of a series that will change her life, change lives, that everyone's millions of lives. I applaud these first 6 chapters genuinely. Just because she's a young author, just because she, doesn't understand the use of exclamation points and how frequently they can be used, doesn't undermine what she did to this. And what she did was very skillful.
Yeah, I completely agree. She accomplishes a lot in a short space of time, where when you compare it to ACOTAR, those first 5 chapters it was really hard for me to
they were
continue
slow
reading that
going.
book.
Yeah.
Whereas this, I feel like, is fast-paced and intriguing the whole way.
And I can understand why someone would, like, even though this is YA, romantasy, fantasy, whatever you want to call it, I can see why people want to continue.
Yep, I agree.
And I can't wait for us to continue. All right, let's sign off.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Book Talk for Book Talk with Jac and Amy. Next week, we'll be exploring chapters 7 through 10 of Throne of Glass.
We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform. We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You could submit your comments to our forum at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a future mini episode or a Patreon exclusive episode.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and learn about supporting the show through Patreon or Venmo. You can also follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at the handle booktalkforbooktalk. Bye.
Happy because I almost did braids, so.
Oh, well, I'm glad you didn't.
That would have been hilarious. But you're definitely giving Wednesday Addams.
Oh, yeah.
You're in your element.
I am.
Oh,
Ready?
You get to do it for All Throne of Glass, the first one. Congrats.
All right. Well, I better sound good, I guess.
Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, with a special shout out to our August 2020.
I don't know about you, Jack, but when it's gift giving season, as much as I love to get everyone gifts, I always stop and get myself something as well, because you never know if it's going to be a win or bust with everybody else's presents to you.
The real gift is the one we can give ourselves, particularly the ones we can order from Quince. Quince has the most amazing everyday luxury items, but at an affordable price.
This is the time of year where those iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters from Quince are the perfect snuggly thing to wear to the office, to wear on the couch.
I've been visiting my mom who now lives in the East Coast, and it is cold there, and I do not have the proper clothes. And I've actually been ordering some of my clothes from Quince because all items on Quince are 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They're able to do that by partnering direct with top factories and cutting out the cost of middleman, and passes on the savings to you. And you can get sweaters and coats, which is what I got.
Not only do they use premium fabrics and finishes, they also work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. If you haven't treated yourself yet, get yourself that present you'll love this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order.
That's QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/booktalk. 24 Trophy Wives. Thank you, Olivia, Anya, Fiction Fan, Shelby, Liv, Amber, Veronica, Anne, Jackie, Nicole, Amelade, Jessica, Helen, Danica, Carissa, Colleen, Alexa, Sam, and Allison. To learn more about how to become a Trophy Wife, visit patreon.com/booktalk for book talk. Thanks, Trophy Wives.